Welcome. Will there be plastic pollution post-pandemic? This is a concern raised by many. In light of the COVID-19 pandemic, where health and survival is at stake, we've had no choice but to demand personal protection equipment, and single-use plastic has witnessed a rise. But where will all this go once the crisis is over? In this context, today we will be discussing how can we integrate public health with the well-being of the planet. I'd like to welcome and introduce the panel today. We have Mirza, actor, producer, UNEP Goodwill Ambassador, and UN Secretary General's Advocate for Sustainable Development Goals. Dia actively advocates for environmental and wildlife conservation and has led campaigns to beat plastic pollution. I'm also joined by Joao Sousa, Senior Program Officer for Marine Plastics at the International Union of Conservation of Nature. Joao is an experienced biotechnology engineer with 20 years of experience in both engineering and biotechnology. At the IUCN, he focuses on collaborative solutions to mitigate plastic debris in the world's oceans. Welcome, Joao. Andrew Almack, founder and CEO of Plastics for Change. Plastics for Change enables global brands and manufacturers to source high-quality plastic from responsible supply chains, and the company is verified by World Fair Trade Organization. Welcome. Let's start with you, Andrew. We're in the midst of a pandemic right now where health and survival is at stake. What are your key concerns?
Oh, there's a lot. I think in particular, when you look at places like India, still 80 or 90% of the recycling activities are done in the informal waste economy. And the lockdown that we've been through here has really affected those daily wage earners, the waste pickers, who to begin with are already some of the poorest people in society. But then when you go through a lockdown, a lot of them just don't have any means at all. And we've, through our baseline survey that we did quite recently, we found that around 30% of these waste pickers don't even have ID cards. So they're unable to access a lot of the government schemes as well. So for the waste pickers, at least, the biggest cause of concern is not even necessarily getting coronavirus. It's more so just getting food on the table.
Dia, your thoughts?
It's a tough question to answer because there's just so much connected, like Andrew just said, to every aspect. I think the primary focus right now for everyone is to find a way to reach out to those who are most affected by this situation, who are facing obviously unemployment, lack of opportunity, food, basic things that they need for survival. And while we focus on that, I think it's equally pertinent to draw the government's attention and the civic body's attention to waste management. It is already an issue that we've been confronted by that has caused a serious degradation of the quality of air we breathe, the water we drink. We're aware of what kind of toxicity and pollution it creates. But in a pandemic where biomedical waste is something that has already not received enough importance in a developing nation like ours, I think it becomes even more critical for us to emphasize on the need to very swiftly implement systems that can manage biomedical waste better. And because that is, while we are dealing with the crisis, what the biomedical waste can do is to accelerate the issue, make it even worse. So one is the whole plastic component of this waste, but the other is also the hazard to health, immediate hazard to health as well.
Sure, these are two very pertinent points that Dia has raised. One is about the plastic pollution and one is also about the health hazards. Before we get on to policy, what is the kind of waste that this pandemic is looking to generate? How much waste are we looking to generate as a part of this pandemic?
I wish I knew. Well, we've been reading reports that nowadays hospitals are generating, at least in the region of Wuhan, 6 times more medical waste than normal. Knowing that 25% at least of this plastic of this waste normally is plastic, but in this case during the pandemic, I'm pretty sure this is not 25%. It should be higher. Just to have a general idea, I'm quoting National Geographic, I guess, that the daily output of 240 metric tons of plastic waste is equivalent of a blue whale per day. Well, not really, because actually blue whales are 150 to 200 tons, but it's just to have an idea of the amount of waste that is actually being generated. And of course, then we need to offset some of the plastic that is not being used because some surgeries are not taking place and other medical acts. But overall, of course, we should expect an increase of plastic in the magnitude of 5 to 6 times more than the normal usage of, without pandemic.
Speaking of medical waste in particular, I just want to understand, medical waste is designed to be disposal. I mean, you use and you throw it. Is there any way we can make the consumption circular instead of this linear way it's consumed?
Yes, then we would start a discussion about how practical, how easy it is to throw away this throwaway culture. But pretty sure, if we're not talking about plastic that is, we're calling it food grade, plastic that will be in contact with food that we need to take special precautions on the way they might release, I don't know, even nanoparticles of plastic, or the fact that they can leachate chemicals at a determined concentration, or the fact that they might release some monomers from incomplete polymerization. So everything that is not food related, so we will not ingest, we can use most any type of plastic. In the case of surgery, I'm pretty sure, and this is already being developed, some type of polymers that are easily or more easily sterilized. So this is more or less the direction we're going to. So maybe start with well, using products that are actually reusable, and if not, trying to see if we at least can use it and produce it from recycled material, because this leads to less source of virgin material, of course, and less waste.
Andrew, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think if you look at the use of recycled polyester for many of the gowns and garments, it's already using some recycled plastic. That's something where it's not, in direct contact as a medical device. So I think that's important to continue to emphasize. When it comes to the informal waste economy, which is where my expertise lies, in terms of picking up from hospitals directly, it's you need a special license, so the informal sector isn't able to go and actually access any of the medical waste itself. But when it comes to a lot of the waste that is generated at the household level or ends up in the street, of course, we're seeing everybody has a mask here in India, and where's that mask end up? And so it's really important that households implement the proper segregation of their waste at home. Here in India, there's a movement called 2 bin 1 bag. So there's a specific bin just for hazardous waste, which you can put everything. And the best practice is to actually wrap, whether it's an old sanitary pad or anything that should go into hazardous waste. Also then wrap that in newspaper and keep that separately. And that's the number one thing that people can do, I think, to keep their waste workers at a bit of a distance.
Andrew has raised a very important point about the unorganized sector. And in light of this pandemic, we're also going to have a lot of people who are infected with this contagious virus, and will be disposing waste. What are the kind of policies that you see we need to deploy for that sector of the economy? And what are the challenges that you see we need to overcome?
Saachi, I think the approach, you know, so the segregation of waste was implemented is something that has become a law in India. We're unfortunately still combating the lack of initiative by citizens, and it's taking time to bring about behavioral change. You know, there's been all kinds of approaches implemented where, you know, people have been fined, many things have happened, but I'll stick with the positive side of the coin. So as of now, we're segregating waste in two parts, right? There's wet waste, which is supposed to be your kitchen compostable waste, and your dry waste. Now, for the large part, most people do not segregate biomedical waste or e-waste or any, because there are lots of people even at home who generate biomedical waste, right? And during the pandemic, interestingly enough, there are lots of people who will be disposing of masks and gloves. A lot of people are using gloves every time they go out, and most of these gloves are single-use latex gloves. And that again generates a serious amount of waste. So I think what Andrew says about wrapping that up in a newspaper to help protect, but I'm actually very concerned about the fact that we don't really have systems in place, even now, that segregate waste the way it needs to be segregated. From the not just the point of disposal, but even the point of collection from the municipal workers. So by the time it reaches a dumping ground, it's already kind of mixed up. There's a so even if you're doing it at source, it doesn't reach the dumping ground in that segregated manner. So even the collection trucks, the systems, there's a lot that has to change, and we are quite far from, you know, having that implemented. So the policy exists, but it isn't as defined as it needs to be. It's very simplistic. So it needs to have now more than ever before a more defined purview of end to end of all waste. So from the point of disposal to collection to then further disposal, because then it, whatever, whether it goes into a circular economy or it goes into any, whether it gets incinerated, because a lot of our waste is incinerated.
Right.
So my hope really would be that we, while we're working on this, we can, you know, mobilize a very strong movement and action on the ground, where of course we encourage human behavioral change, but we also encourage governments to implement systems that are absolutely necessary. We can't ignore this anymore. And I understand that as a developing country, there's so much within this crisis that we're dealing with, but we're very capable of making things happen, where we've put our mind to it, where, you know, the private sector and the government have worked together. We've seen big change. I'll give you a positive example.
Sure.
The neighborhood that I live in, all the wet waste that is collected here is taken to this wonderful station that has been built that creates energy for the entire neighborhood. So all the, you know, the lighting for the streets is produced by that plant that receives all wet waste.
That's so interesting. And Joao, you know, medical waste, like Dia said, a lot of it, I just picked on that one part where she said a lot of it gets incinerated. And the example that she gave of creating electricity from it.
Yeah.
Is there any way that we can further segregate these kind of plastics to reduce the amount that actually goes into landfills or is incinerated and can be brought back to into the economy and make it more circular?
Yeah, that should be a principle, but this is not one single action, meaning that, for instance, if we consider the usage of biodegradable material, and a lot of people use the word without actually understanding the meaning of it, meaning that if I use a biodegradable, let's say, cup in my house, it's only good as the management system I have in place outside my house. It means that this biodegradable material needs to be collected, sorted out, and processed separately. Biodegradable, if you go to the classical definition or the one that is common standard, says that any biodegradable material that is subjected to this temperature, this humidity, and after 19 days, not more than 10% of dry weight will remain, meaning that you will have specific facilities. So just having biodegradable material that I'm using in my apartment or in my house doesn't mean anything if, well, the collection system does not take it anywhere. So obviously this is a commitment that needs to be from the user, but also from the producer and from the guy that does the logistics, the recycler, the waste manager. So it needs to be a concerted position. Even when we go to situations like we cannot recycle it, PET, and we have a lot of plastic that we have nothing to do with it, but we can either do plastic to fuel or plastic to energy directly. And this could be an option. I do not oppose to this type of option. We can discuss this if it's the most environmental sounding technology. No, it's not, but it's a problem that needs to be dealt with. Not to mention that if you realize that in some countries, 25 to 30%, and some even more, of the waste that gets to landfills, it's actually plastic, then you have a problem because landfills in the past basically would be places where the waste would decompose naturally. Obviously, plastic doesn't decompose naturally, or if it does, it takes centuries to decompose. This means that a lot of landfills around the world are getting like full. Technically, they reach their maximum capacity. So of course, the less burden you put into landfills by extracting those value materials that can be either recycled or turned into energy, well, the better for the entire system.
There's a lot of individual action that can also come into effect. I mean, I do know that with awareness, growing awareness, a lot of people are refusing single-use plastic. And I think that makes a very big difference, even from the point of view of how, I mean, refusing products that are packaged in plastic. I think that makes a big difference, but it's a very small percentage of people who are able to do that. You know,
Right.
Because at the end of the day, if a large community of people is receiving a daily consumption product like milk in a milk packet, then they're going to find it very difficult to say no to these things. So yes, it is equally important for producers to become responsible for collection and recycling of their waste.
One of the interesting trends we have seen out of this pandemic is consumer mentality towards single-use plastic. Like you said, there are people who have started moving towards not using single-use plastic, demanding more cloth bags, changing their perspective towards it. But now suddenly there seems to be a different mentality where plastic cups are coming back for health and hygiene, for sanitation. Large coffee houses are encouraging you to take the coffee mugs, the disposable ones, instead of bring your own mug. Grocery bags, they have removed the charge in the UK for grocery bags. If you have to take a grocery bag, and you're discouraged from bring your own bag. Do you see these as now rollbacks on hard-won environmental measures that people have fought for?
Well, I wouldn't say roll back, but yeah, we've lost some momentum, and naturally so. I think it's a paradoxical world. While we have made some stride in helping people understand how terrible plastic waste has been for the planet in all aspects, and while there was some amount of solution that had come into effect, I think that because there is such a big fear of the virus and the fact that it's contagious right now, just most people feel safer.
Which Andrew and I were interestingly discussing this morning could be a myth. Is plastic or single-use plastic relatively safer?
Sorry?
Is single-use plastic or using plastic right now relatively safer and helping you fight COVID?
Is that a question for me?
Yes.
Anyone, whoever would like to take it?
Well, I wish I knew. You see, there's so much we don't know, right? Today, news about research are presented as absolute truth and always start with something like, according to one study. This is impressive. And normally this study is done by a research center from nobody knows university, by renowned scientists, and this is very strange. So every single day you open your media channel, whatever it is, you understand that the virus is spreading all over. And it's through air, blood, saliva, semen, tears, can last from 1 to several days in various surfaces. So at this point, there's no way to say which one is safer. Can you sterilize this? Can you sterilize that? It's really, really very difficult to know. And it's not so much a choice of material because we cannot just go and suddenly change the objects that we have for other materials. The materials already exist, so the products already exist, and these are the ones to be used. Telling that this one is safer than the other one, that is a trick.
Then my question again, why is there an increase in demand for single-use plastic then?
Because of the fear psychosis, Saachi. It's a vicious cycle. I mean, people are just afraid right now. And that fear makes them do things that they would otherwise not do. But I think for the long term, what will be necessary is for us to continue to, let people know how much. I mean, just in 2016 alone, the world generated 242 million tons of plastic waste. That's equivalent to about 24 trillion or 500 milliliter 10-gram plastic bottles. Now, the sad thing about the plastic waste that we generate is that most of it has nowhere to go. It just lands up in the environment, for whether it's ocean debris or in our landfills or gutters or whatever it is. It's causing a lot of havoc. So the point on how do we manage plastic waste better? Do we need to ensure we reduce our consumption of plastic? Because what is plastic made of? And how much more plastic are we going to continue to make, given that we know it has nowhere to go?
Right.
And most of it is not recycled. So I think this is really a solution that human beings will hopefully arrive at in the next decade, with a lot of proactive work and measures implemented across all spheres. But during a pandemic, it's tough to answer this question. The only thing that I can speak of at a personal level would be, I'm going to find every way I can to reduce my consumerist behavior. Everything that I do in my life, every single day, has to come from that awareness and consciousness that I'm taking from the earth, and it has to go back to earth. And if it's not good for the earth, I'm not using it. And it really has to come down to that. So if it's a mask, then I will use a rewashable mask. And I will not use the single-use plastic gloves. I will wash my hands, but I will not use that glove. So that's a choice and a decision we can make.
As individuals.
Absolutely.
And Andrew,
if a coffee house refuses to serve me coffee when I bring firstly, most coffee houses are shut right now, but when they do open up, I will take my mug with me. And if they refuse to serve me coffee, I won't have coffee at that coffee house.
And those are individual choices that people can make.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What are the kind of industries, and specifically for you, Andrew, I put this question to you. Dia said it comes from the earth, it goes back into the earth. While we make individual choices, which are the industries that can come forward and help in plastic recycling?
Good question. I think that it is very important to make decisions as a conscious consumer and look to avoid the uses of things like straws and single-use cups. But I also do want to highlight that, as Dia mentioned, it's we're spending like close to $500 billion every year on making new plastic, with a B, 500 billion, and the amount of that actually goes into single-use plastic like straws and cups is actually a pretty small percentage. So we're not going to solve the whole crisis by, even if we did that perfectly, we were not going to solve the plastic pollution crisis. I think what we need to do is actually take a bit of a lesson from history. And the last time something like this happened was in the Spanish flu and the recession that followed. And as a result of that, there were many global institutions that were formed. There's the Marshall Plan, which led into the development of so many things, the International Monetary Fund, et cetera. And I think that the state of affairs of the plastics industry was really just heading right off a cliff. And I think it's almost good to, okay, let's use this opportunity. It's interesting, the same word in the Chinese dialect is the same symbol used for the word opportunity and crisis. And I think we need to capitalize on it and look at a way of catalyzing a systemic change that impacts all industries. And the easiest way to do that is to put a price on taking the new plastic out of the earth. And this has already been introduced in terms of, globally, there's many different, what's referred to as cap and trade models for carbon that are happening in isolation in different silos. But I think what we really need right now is to take into account some of the social capital costs, or the costs of damaging the environment, and factor that into the price of extracting new virgin plastic from the earth, and then use that as a theme for making the economics in recycled plastic more viable. I think that right now what we're seeing is the price of plastic going so low that the unit economics of actually how complex it is to recycle all the plastic, it's in some cases it's just not feasible. I was talking to a chemical company, and they're like, yeah, we usually just hook up a pipeline and send it into our cracking facility, and it's so much more complicated, organizing 100,000 waste pickers to get the same volume as a single pipeline. So that's what I think we need to have a full systems change, and really use this crisis to mobilize.
Joao, I think you wanted to add something to that.
Never. I never want to add anything. Now, I was listening to Andrew. Actually, it's curious because I've been listening to this discussion for a long time in terms of substitute materials and what we do with them. And this one, plastic is even better than glass because blah, 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 blah. This is very interesting. But all these life cycle assessments and all of these studies are always very biased. They're always related with economics. And I get it, that's fine, but I'm not an economist, so I can indulge myself in going into other considerations. Now, most of these studies never, ever add externalities or natural capital cost of a product. This means that if I can put actually the potential loss of biodiversity, ecosystem services, potentially human health, loss of tourism, loss of fisheries, drift from plastic pollution into actually the material when it's done,
and impact
then by
on
far,
economy because of loss of human health.
Sorry?
Impact on economy because of loss of human health.
Right.
When you start to add everything, then probably your product is not so environmentally friendly after a proper life cycle assessment. Which brings us to the question, so when do you decide, how do you make the choice, the right choice? Because this needs to be an effort, again, not only from the consumer, but from all of us. We've been talking with companies that are trying to be very advanced when it comes to new polymer designs, meaning that you can actually design a polymer that degrades when you want and not when it wants. Now, the difference is because it needs a lot of investment. And as Andrew was saying, that it's far easier and cheaper, to say replacing easier for cheaper, to just put a pipeline and supply my petrochemical industry, my cracking industry to whatever I want, instead of having 500 waste speakers all organized and cleaning the plastic and supplying the plastic, whatever it is. It's a question of cost. And I know that, for instance, instead of like we did with plastic, that we start in the 1850 or something, that we start to have this material and we transform the material until we get to the function that we need. Actually, technology will soon allow us to actually go the other way around, which is a material that does not exist. Let's call it X. But I want this material to perform these functions. So the machine, in this case, the computer, will give me exactly the material I want to produce, the polymer I want. And this polymer will be able, for instance, in contact with a specific catalyst, to degrade immediately. This means that whatever I do with plastic will be 100% pure recyclable. But we are still like 5 or 10 years from this. Meanwhile, there's so much we can do. And a lot of companies can do this. And I've been talking with companies from plastic producers to tires that, of course, technically they're not plastic. They're styrene, butadiene rubber. It's a polymer, but it's not plastic. It's an elastomer. But still, the degradation or the abrasion of tires behave the same way as plastic. So we consider them as microplastics in terms of the impacts that they can cause. So a lot of work needs to be done in terms of technology. But I'm already drifting a bit from the original question.
That brings me to the next question. And, you know, when we put the question out to the public and ask them, what are the kind of questions that you would like to ask about better alternatives? Of course, technology was one thing that came, and they wanted to know what are the other alternatives which can be functionally the same as plastic, but could be better for the environment right now.
I would be a rich man if I could answer that.
Andrew, do we have anything right now?
Well, there's various types of bioplastics that I could go into some detail on, but I think there's something that can be scalable. I think you still have to look at the use of recycled plastic until we're not producing the 200 or the $500 billion worth of new plastic every year. We still need to try to get that plastic cleaned up and not just ending up in all the places we don't want. And I think that because a lot of the fast-moving consumer goods sectors are very price sensitive, that there's no bioplastic that will come in at a price point that will be widely adopted. It'll have to be through legislation. And I think if you're doing something like that, it might not be the right legislation. I think we should focus on getting
and I think correct
recycling.
I'm wrong, but I think only less than 10% of plastic has ever been recycled.
Yeah, I mean, it's 2020. I think recycling rates are still only 9% globally. In India, the big fact that really needs to be considered in context here is that the state pollution control boards estimate that 40% of the waste doesn't get collected at all. So forget about having like a treatment plant for some type of bioplastic. If 40% of the waste is not collected at all, so like we need to address the root cause of the problem. And
that's where implementation of policy you mentioned there was lacking.
And the other, I think one policy that is completely directly linked to what you've been talking about so far is extended producers' responsibility. While we've been trying to get that policy moving in India, we still haven't arrived at a policy that everybody is in agreement with. But it's going to be a policy that is going to definitely define the way every state treats their waste. The producers have a very big stake in that effort. The other problem with a lot of the waste that does get collected is the multi-layered aspect of it, which again makes it difficult to recycle or kind of introduce back into circular economy. So that's another aspect that we really need to define within the extended producers' responsibility for companies to understand that if you're selling a packet of wafers, it cannot have 3 layers of packaging on it. That makes it impossible for anybody to upcycle, recycle, downcycle, do anything with it. Am I wrong, Andrew?
No, I couldn't agree more. I was at the store the other day, and there was a coconut, and it was wrapped in 4 different types of plastics. There's the lid, there's the PET bottle, there's the wrap around the bottle, and then there's the wrap around the case. And it's like, it's a coconut. How does it have 4 different types of plastic? And then even the mango had another 2 types of plastic. The styrene covering it, and then a shrink wrap.
There's only one word for this. It's disgusting.
And it's scary.
This will not change until, and you see now, not only with the pandemic, but every time you have a crash in oil and gas prices, basically the recycled plastic market falls down, as you know, Andrew. So it's highly dependent and shouldn't be. One of the things that actually should be taking place is that you devise policies, which is very difficult worldwide to implement this, where a specific policy is designed by plastic products producers that they can produce whatever they're producing in plastic, like a pen, like a cover of a mobile, whatever it is, as long as they introduce 10, 15, 20, 25, and increasing per year content of recycled plastic. Even public procurement in ministries, in national governments would say, our procurement will have to have a small line saying that we will give a majoration of 5% if the content of plastic is recycled plastic up to 25%. And this would increase according to years. This is the only way to actually have a boosting market for recycled plastic. And this is the only way to close the plastic tap at one point. Because I keep saying, and this is the name of our program at IUCN, Close the Plastic Tap, because we still understand, and for us, there's no point on going clean whatever it is, as long as you don't close the tap, it doesn't make sense. You close the tap first, you stop the leakage, and then you do something if you can, mitigation. But until then, you need to close the tap. And one of the ways to do this is not saying to people, you cannot use plastic anymore. Yes, you need to use plastic. It's a fantastic material, but use it wisely. It's always a question of, let's say, geographic location. I always say this, simplifying. Water is nice in my cup, water is not nice inside my TV screen. Plastic is the same. Keep it outside where it shouldn't be. But plastic is still a fantastic material, it's my view.
I couldn't agree more with the policies to increase the use of recycled plastic, and it needs to be ramped up over time, especially if you look at dividing it by industry sectors and saying that if you're in this, it's already happening in places like California. If you make, say, a laundry detergent bottle in California, you have to use a certain amount of recycled plastic, and it creates a level playing field, right? Because the consumer goods industry is so cost sensitive. We need to have a level playing field for the Unilever and the Procter & Gamble competing on that same little margin for selling, in this case, laundry detergent. There needs to be a penalty for not using recycled plastic. And the other word for this is cap and trade, which is maybe not the right branding, but essentially that. And it should be rolled out across industry segments. And so if your sachet pack isn't using recycled plastic as well, the penalty for that segment is more than the ones where it's being used aggressively.
Yeah, you can have even tax deductions on your products if they have higher content of recycled products, meaning that you can put it in the market for a lower price. Because at one point, if some states are already heavily subsidizing extraction and transformation of oil products, at the other hand, you're not subsidizing let's say the front runners, the champions that could actually provide some of the solutions. This is kind of awkward. So there's a lot of policy work that needs to be done in this area.
Right. And a lot of implementation work also, like Thea mentioned. On concluding thoughts, what is going to be the new normal for both public health and the planet? Thea.
Yeah, first, yes, exactly.
Well, I think we will have to become even more determined and even more resolute about defending and protecting the planet. There is a lot of work to be done. I think in many ways, this pause that the world has witnessed has given us all the opportunity, and for all of those who had just stopped seeing and noticing things that were really essential for our survival,
Right.
have had the opportunity to notice those things and discover those things. And I also think, like, for example, clean air. 14 of the most polluted cities, 21 out of 21 of the most polluted cities, 14 are in India. And I think all 14 cities have, during this pause, witnessed cleaner air than we have.
Delhi especially. I'm from the most polluted city probably in the world.
It's unimaginable, right, for most people. And that's, I think, just a very, it's evidence of the fact that nature is a self-repairing system. When we give nature the room to breathe and do what she does best, things magically get better. But what definitely does come to mind at an individual level that I feel very strongly about, because I know that there is going to continue to be this whole economics versus ecology fight that's going to continue. And I think it may get even more difficult now than ever before, because people will want to go back to work. People will want to restart factories. There will be all kinds of pressure to generate income for people, right?
Mm.
And while we are doing that, I think we have a great opportunity to build back better and put the systems that we need to put in place. Because if the world could manage to shut down the way it has, and it's given our rivers the opportunity to clean up. I mean, we've spent thousands of crores to clean up the Ganga and the Yamuna, which we didn't achieve in all these years. But this pause has made these rivers cleaner than they've been in years. What does that show us? It basically tells us that the factories that we're spewing affluents into the rivers have to stop doing what they're doing. The tourism industry has to become more responsible about how they manage their waste. So we just have to stop using our natural spaces and our resources like a trash can, and be more respectful, more compassionate, and more sincere towards building back a world that understands that all human health and progress is linked with the environment. And there is no way we can hope to achieve anything with our lives if we don't recognize this. And I mean, I find it baffling that people are still arguing about the fact that economies will perhaps come at the cost of ecology. We will have to continue to destroy biodiversity. We will have to continue to do certain things. We will have to continue to burn combustible fuel. We don't have to do any of these things, but it will take a very strong will on the part of certain people that control everything. And I think if the world comes together and says enough, this has to change, we may be able to change it. But we certainly can't go back to life as usual and say, it's happening and what can we do? There's a lot that can be done and has to be done.
That's a very strong point that Dia's made. Andrew, your thoughts and critical challenges that we have to overcome now in the new normal.
Yeah, I think we've also uncovered a few silver linings with this pandemic. I think the one is that people are understanding a little bit more about their waste, and hopefully there's now a greater awareness for the importance of segregating the waste at home. With the informal waste economy, let's also remember that there's a lot of diseases that they're also exposed to just on a day-to-day basis. There's a huge cholera problem here as well. So, the use of personal protective equipment in that sector is also increased now, which is hopefully a habit that will remain into the future. And I think overall, it's really taught us as humanity that we're all just so connected, and that the virus that starts here spreads all over the world quickly, in the same way that the plastic burning in a pile outside my house here in India ends up in your nostrils there in Switzerland in only a few weeks as well. And if you drop some plastic in the canal in Switzerland, it'll end up in a fish that I eat here in India. It's all very well connected. So I think hopefully it's been a bit of a shift in our collective consciousness as well.
Joao, the new normal. For both public health and the planet.
This will vary from country to country. Of course, it's very difficult to predict. What is very easy to predict is probably now, now gloves and masks are probably the item number one found across seashores around the world. Not so much cigar butts and textile and polyester from textile. So pretty sure that's what we have now. I hope this is not the new normal and we find a solution for this. I hope that the new normal will be a place where environment is not, it's not just a war being waged against between left and right politics, because it's just nonsense. Environment, it's environment. I hope also that the consumer is getting more and more aware of the results of no impacts, because they're actually seeing how the world, how the ocean looks without these impacts. And this can be from the beach cleanup done by Afrosas in India. This can be done. I could name several examples where you start to see actually turtles returning to places where they haven't been seen for years, or even back home, bears coming very close to cities and coming up from forests and and you start to see rivers absolutely clean, and it's incredible. And for me, the new normal would be a place where people are actually motivated. For instance, my son doesn't remember because he never lived this. I hope that the generation after the generation of my son can drink water from rivers. I used to, back in the north of Portugal, just, hey, are you thirsty? Drink the water. It's fine. And I'm pretty sure you cannot do this mostly anywhere around the world right now. So I hope that the new normal will be this, not right now, but in a couple of years, that we learn from our mistakes and from what's happening now, that it's not that difficult to go and revert the situation that we are in now. My message
on that note, I hope the new normal is everything that you all said today. And thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, Saachi. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.